move the motion. Alison.
Thank you very much, Mr Streeter. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair. I beg to move that this House has considered the two-child limit in universal credit and child tax credits. It's pretty Mr Streeter, I find it's pretty surreal still to be here, still to be debating the issue of the two-child limit in universal credit and child tax credits. When I saw the limit and the cruel and pernicious rate clause which stands part of this policy laid out in the Chancellor's budget in 2014, I was sure I must have made a mistake. No humane government, after all, would propose such a blunt instrument as to limit support to the first two children in a family, or to make a woman prove she's been raped just to put food on the table. Unfortunately, Mr Streeter, I was wrong. We are 3 years, 4 months and 20 days after that budget, and the UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights has found that this UK Tory government is exactly such an inhumane government. Despite warnings from all manner of groups and cross-party support, despite U-turns on various other policies over the years, the two-child policy is apparently the one this UK Tory government will stick through thick and thin. A policy that stands in judgment of people's lives and suggests that those who are less well off cannot have as many children as they like, to quote Tory Social Security spokesperson Michelle Ballantyne, MSP. This policy is damaging in the extreme, and I wish to outline to the Minister exactly why. I would also like to give him the opportunity to think again before this policy hits its next phase in February next year. From February, Mr Streeter, all new claims will be subject to the two-child policy, regardless of when children were born. This means that though you may have planned your family in good times, when you could well afford to support 3 children, the UK Tory government doesn't care. They will only support 2. Life is unpredictable, Mr Streeter. It only takes somebody to get ill or to die, a partner to leave, or for someone to lose their job to turn life upside down. And we note the plight of the Michelin workers in Dundee. They were not expecting to lose their jobs, Mr Streeter. None of us would expect to be prepared for such eventualities. Also, contraception can fail, and I note research from the Advisory Group on Contraception, who have produced start figures and cuts to sexual and reproductive health services in England, so help is also being lost to many on the ground. And I would challenge anyone in this room to plan out exactly, specifically, the financial situation for them and each of their children up to the age of 18. It's impossible. Absolutely.
Drew Hendry.
My honourable friend has been a tireless champion of tackling this cause, and I'm grateful for her giving way. Does she agree with me that cutting the child tax credits is actually tantamount to directly targeting children with austerity? Yeah.
I absolutely agree with my honourable friend's point, and this moves away, it breaks the link between need and what somebody receives, because these families are no less in need, but they are having their money cut. And it's impossible for just about anyone, other than the super rich and perhaps the royal family, to make plans in this way. And the UK Tory government is hacking away at the safety net that a social security system ought to be. Absolutely.
Jim Cunningham.
Honourable Lady, for giving way, and I congratulate her on securing this debate. The point I'd want to make in this is women are carrying the brunt of austerity. Let's be frank about that. Whether you talk about nursery provision, tax credits, the WASPI women, the list is endless in actual fact. And women has made a major contribution to austerity in the sense that 14 billion is through adjustments to tax. Women have carried the burden on that. The same with WASPI, the savings they've made there on the pensions.
The honourable gentleman is absolutely correct in what he says. And the Women's Budget Group have found that 86% of cuts, 86% of cuts to welfare have come out of women's pockets. This is a very gendered and targeted approach the government is taking, and they should be wary of it.
The Charity Refuge found that the two-child limit is forcing survivors of domestic abuse and their children into poverty as a result of increasing financial dependence on their perpetrators. Does the honourable member agree with me that they ultimately are fearful to leave abusive relationships for fear that they can't support themselves, and therefore this is another example of where this policy has gone wrong?
My honourable friend makes a good point. I will talk about some of the evidence from Refuge later on in my remarks, because it is absolutely stark and the government should take heed of it. A social security safety net ought to be there for everybody, each one of us, when we need it. But the two-child limit has already affected 73,530 households up until April 2018. Well over half of these households, 43,420, will in work, so I will not have it from the Minister or anybody else in the Tory benches, which I know are remarkably empty this afternoon. The old Tory trope that this policy is about people on benefits making the same choices as those supporting themselves solely through work. This benefit is designed to top up people on the lowest paid work, to help support them and to make sure that their children are fed and clothed. And of those 73,530 households, 2,900 were able to keep their entitlement for a third child by claiming an exemption to the policy. There are 3 exemptions largely to the two-child limit. None of them are entirely logical, and I would very much recommend members to check out the Child Poverty Action Group's page in the exemptions to see how mind-bendingly arcane they are. The first exemption is the rape clause, and I want to put on record again, Mr Streeter, my absolute disgust at a policy that forces women to fill out this form to say that they have been conceived their third child as the result of rape. It is absolutely inexcusable as a policy, Mr Streeter. Inexcusable. To have to put your child's name on a form and say that they were conceived as a result of rape is beyond contempt, and this government should know better than to treat women in this way. And we know from the figures that 190 women across the UK up until April have claimed under this exemption. That's 190 women that have had to replay the most traumatic experience of their life to put food on the table. This government should hang its head in shame. The second exemption is around twins. But again, this is not as simple as it ought to be, because they only if these twins are born after a single birth, but not before. And if you have twins after 2 previous children, only 1 twin will be eligible for payment. Both of those twins need to eat, Mr Streeter. And you may have 2 families almost identical, one that has twins, then another birth, one that has another birth, and then twins. Both have 3 children. Only one of them is worthy of support from this government. It's completely illogical. The third is around adoption. But again, not if you've adopted from abroad or if you're a step-parent before you adopted the third child. So it's not even as simple as that. And there's been an additional exemption made, and I must pay tribute to the member for Great Grimsby for this, around kinship care, who successfully campaigned on behalf of her constituent, Alyssa Vesey, who lost out on entitlement for her own child after taking on caring responsibilities for her 3 younger siblings. The clear result of this, Mr Streeter, of this policy and these exemptions is discrimination. Some families may have very similar circumstances and very similar needs, but some will lose out simply due to the order in which their children were born, something those children certainly have absolutely no control over. And I understand that CPAG will be back in court on this issue before Christmas, and I wish them the very best with their case. They believe, and I agree with them, that the two-child limit breaches Articles 8 and 12 of the Human Rights Act 1998, and it's beyond me how this could possibly be compliant with the UK Government's obligations under the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. There will also be an impact on blended families and families who may be encouraged to separate to avoid being hit by the limit. A friend of mine also pointed out that women who have children from previous relationships are going to be caught should they wish to have a child with a new partner, which is very, very common, whereas the male partner may be able to go off and start a new family more easily without having the children with him.
Cooper Huck.
I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving way. Isn't it depressing that it's 2 Tuesdays in a row now that we've been debating this, and I want to thank her for coming to the APPG on single-parent families. She talked about blended families. They'll be hit hardest of all. Yeah. As it is, this is a government that abolished the cross-party, cross-departmental department on child poverty. They're trying to abolish these things, but you know, they've got really mismatched priorities, and also it's the churches that have been very vocal on this. The Bishop of Oxford spoke last week. I wondered if she had any comment on that.
Alison Thewlis.
I absolutely agree, and I commend her and her colleagues for the work on the all-party group on single-parent families as well, because they will be hugely hit by this and provides huge disincentives for those single-parent families to go on into work or to progress. It just simply puts them further into poverty and makes it harder for them to get out of that poverty. Of course.
Kate Green.
I'm grateful, and I congratulate her on securing this debate. Wouldn't you agree that this obscene policy is fuelled by the government's abolition of the child poverty target, which would have compelled them to look at policies like this and realise that they could not possibly be compatible with such a target?
Absolutely, and I will return to the issue of what the objectives of this policy are and how really unmeetable those objectives are, given the child poverty that will result from these policies. And it's absolutely clear that none of the things in this policy fit with the government's objective of giving people a more stable family life. In fact, it plunges families further into uncertainty and into crisis and puts them under tremendous strain. And it's clear that it will be children who will lose out as a result of this. And it's estimated that this policy will, in time, when transitional protections run out, affect around 3 million children. The Church of England estimate that in my constituency of Glasgow Central alone, this will be 1,600 families and 5,500 children. A total of 36% of the children in my constituency. I can't begin to tell you the impact that this will have on their health, their education and the life chances of these young people. Absolutely.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And once again, she's making a passionate speech on this issue. Does she share my concerns? Though there's another issue here as well, that families potentially expecting a third child might be forced to have an abortion as a result of this. And often this is people in faith communities that are likely to have larger families.
Listen through this.
Honourable friend is absolutely right, and there is clear evidence on this, which I will touch on later on in my speech. And it's really disturbing, Mr Streeter, the ends that this government is forcing families into and the decisions they're being forced to make. Because the cut in this benefit is £2,780 per child per year, a sum that families will struggle to make up through taking on extra work. And the Church of England calculate that a single parent with 3 children working 16 hours at the minimum wage, and I should say the Chancellor's pretendy living wage, not an actual living wage that one can live on, would need to work 45 hours to compensate for the loss of income. 45 hours to make up this government's cut. And that's even assuming that work is available to them in their community and that their children can be looked after by somebody when that single parent isn't home. If not, who will do the homework with those children? Who will tuck them into bed at night? Who will make sure that the families are looked after? And what is the mental health impact on that family? And the physical health of the parent too, who will be exhausted, absolutely exhausted, working 45 hours and looking after 3 children, which is a job in itself, Mr Streeter. The impact on family life must be taken into consideration here by the Minister. There's also real disincentives within this policy because it will be much harder for families to move into work. It will take away the incentive to try and get around the benefit cap, as families will end up losing more if they try to work more. And there's a disproportionate hit on particular minority groups. The EHRC has found that families of Bangladeshi and Pakistani origin are particularly badly hit by this policy, losing thousands of pounds. And I've been flagging concern for years now that 60% of Muslim families and 52% of Jewish families have more than 2 children. And there are also concerns, as my honourable friend from Glasgow North West mentioned, from groups of other religious faiths who will not use contraception for moral issues and clearly cannot access abortion services either. They have very little choice, therefore, in the decisions that face them. And this is, of course, a particular issue for women in Northern Ireland, where family size is traditionally larger than the rest of the UK, and as we well know in this House, cannot access abortion services on the same basis as we can here. So I wonder what the Minister expects these women to do in those circumstances. I also wish to mention further this point about abortions. This is becoming the reality for many women. And I would like to read directly from the testimonies of women who have spoken to the Benefits Helpline Turn to Us, because these are absolutely stark and I want the Minister to pay particular attention to them. One woman says, "I have to have an abortion as I can't afford another child. It makes me want to give up my child for adoption. I already due another baby when the new tax credit cap came into play. Now I worry I can't afford to budget for a baby as I won't get any extra help. I found out I was 5 months pregnant and am now in a complete panic. I'm too far on for an abortion, but I have no way of supporting this child. I was taking precautions and definitely did not plan or expect to have any more children. The Mirena coil is meant to be more effective than being sterilised. Worried that I will not be able to afford the child. I'm pregnant at the moment, but I'm worried it may be twins. I was already pregnant, so I could not reconsider. I didn't plan this child, but it's beaten all the odds to get here, and I believe in things happening for a reason, and also do not believe in abortion. So here we are expecting our 3rd child any day, and no help financially. I've worked since I was 15 years old, and I can't get the help when I need it. This was a surprise and an unplanned pregnancy, and I only found out at 20 weeks that I was pregnant due to an NHS mistake, and I don't have the money to raise a child. But due to religious reasons, I cannot terminate the pregnancy for this far along." How can the Minister possibly justify this? Could he look each of these women in the eye and tell them that this policy is about fairness? Furthermore, Refuge have outlined the risk to women at risk of domestic violence of this policy, because the 2-child limit exacerbates the control perpetrators of abuse have on women and puts more pressure and risk on the women. And I would like to share that experience too from the Minister if he wants to stop shuffling his papers and pay attention. Women have felt more trapped and unable to stay as there was no available money to help them move and leave. The 2-child cap means that some women will be pressured into having more children and becoming financially reliant on their partners for support. A resident said that while pregnant with a 3rd child, her ex demanded she have an abortion because he said they could not get any more money for it. And when she said she didn't want one, he tried being violent to enforce a miscarriage. women struggling to manage after fleeing if they have 3 children, feeling like they have no support and no money to support the family, means that they feel that they should stay or return to the perpetrator. I would like to remind members that the rape clause form itself states that women are not eligible for support if they are living with the father of the child, which also forces women to leave before they can do so safely. And we all know, Mr Streeter, that the evidence suggests that that is the most dangerous time. That's the time that women are most likely to be murdered if they leave without any kind of safety planning. I want to tackle, Mr Streeter, before I finish, the suggestion that the Scottish Government should set about mitigating the 2-child limit. First of all, we do not have full control over the welfare benefits system. Why not? Because Labour and the Smith Commission would not trust us to have it. So we end up lumbered with a system Scotland did not design, with policies Scotland did not vote for, and with only the ability to tinker around the edges thanks to the work of the Labour Party. For those in child tax credits, which is still the majority of people within the system, we have no way of mitigating that because that is a function of HMRC. For universal credit, we have, at the moment, administrative flexibilities. The Scottish Government changed payment schedules. We've allowed for payment direct to landlords and for separate payments to help try and tackle financial abuse. But the use of these flexibilities incurs a payment to the DWP for the administration of it, money which I'm sure you would agree we could well spend directly on the front line. I want to make it absolutely clear that I want this policy to go everywhere, Mr Streeter, not just in Scotland. And I have campaigned on a cross-party basis, to this end, and particularly for women in Northern Ireland who have often been unrepresented in this place, who have to fill out a separate rape clause form because they were at risk of prosecution just for filling out the form. So this is why I want to make sure that no woman across the UK gets left behind by this policy. We should be campaigning against this Tory government and focusing all of our fire on this party who want to make women go through this trauma. And the Labour Party's official position, let's not forget, back in 2015 was to support the 2-child limit. And perhaps if Labour had voted with us on the Welfare Reform and Work Act back then, we wouldn't be here 3 years, 4 months, 20 days later discussing this today. I'm coming to the end of my remarks, and I'm sure members will get in with what they want to say. But all of this policy is illogical and it's bad for the economy. In other parts of my casework, I see people working and being denied leave to remain with their families. I see EU nationals scunnered and moving away from the country they had called home due to this UK Tory government's Brexit shambles. And in DWP policy, I see people being discouraged, actively discouraged from having children. Who will be participating in the labour market in the future? Having children is an economic good. Who will look after the minister and his family when he is old and in need of care? The UK Government should wise up to the demographic time bomb they are creating with this and so many other policies. It makes no sense. The Unhappy Birthday report, produced by End Child Poverty, CPAG and the Church of England, states that if you set out to design a policy that was targeted to increase child poverty, then you could not do much better than the 2-child limit. I would like to know what assessment the Minister has done, other than the numbers released in April. What assessment has he done on the impact of the 2-child cap, on all of the areas that I have mentioned in my speech? Not just 1 or 2, but all of these areas, because there are still too many flaws in the 2-child cap, as I have laid out and as I'm sure other members will wish to also. I want to know how we can roll this out without this assessment having been done. This assessment, which has been left to the third sector and to the Church, as the Honourable Lady pointed out, and to so many other organisations. The Government has not taken on this work. They have left it to other people to do this, which is absolutely unacceptable. They need to know what the impact of their policies actually will be on ordinary people that we represent. And I want him to explain why he is pressing ahead with extending this to all families come February next year. Because people could not reasonably have planned the children that they had on the basis of this policy. It's completely unreasonable for somebody in good times to think perhaps in 6, 7 years after I had my child that I might be made unemployed and I might need to claim universal credit, because this would not have been in their head. This is not how people make decisions over their families. It is an absolutely flawed notion that people can do that. So I want the Minister to pause, to tell this House that he can pause this policy, to reflect, to stop it rolling out further and to end it for good. Yeah.